Man, I love Sonic. The bosses are super fun and immersive too. Everyone seems to have a different favorite. I wonder if anyone's ever ranks them all. That's right, you read the title right, and no, this isn't a joke video. I've actually taken every boss from every mainline Sonic game and ranked them based on how much I enjoy them. I'm judging each boss with 4 major categories: gameplay, story, atmosphere, and music. To make this more interesting though, I'm going to give you guys a little minigame. Before each boss, I'm going to put what game they're from, and based on what tier they're in, try and guess what boss it is. In other words, you have to guess what my opinion is. Good luck. Also remember, this is just my opinion. If you don't agree, that's totally fine. I'd love to see your own list, as well as a few death threats in the comments. Without further dawdling, let us begin. To start this off, we have W tier. W standing for worst. The winner of the beige medal for the absolute worst boss in the series is Eggman Diver. I want to know what asshole woke up and thought that Eggman Diver was a good boss. The premise of this boss is pretty simple. Eggman blows up part of Hydrocity Zone, and you have to escape it briefly. It's not really that difficult. Once that minor hazard is out of the way, you have to get onto one of his Eggmobiles and do the reverse of Sonic 3's Hydrocity boss. The only problem is, this boss isn't really difficult, like, at all. Like, the bombs he drops do get sucked in faster than he does, but it's not fast enough to catch you off guard. I genuinely don't believe there's a single person out there who has actually died to this boss. So yeah, it's just slow and annoying. I guess it's kinda creative, but not really. So yeah, congratulations, Egg Diver, you win the very bottom spot on the list. Next. Up next, we have F tier. This tier is for bosses that I dread fighting and would really just prefer if they weren't in the game at all. At the very bottom of F tier, we have Gravitation Mobile. Carnival Night Zone is already considered to be one of the most painful levels in Sonic 3, and its bosses aren't doing it any huge favors. This boss is pretty simple. You damage boost to win. The boss isn't even that creative. All Eggman does is drop a ball near you and then pick it back up. This doesn't sound so bad, except for the fact that hitting the sides of the boss hurts you. The only way to win is to hit the boss directly on the head, and good luck doing that when he's not picking the ball up. If you're going into this boss with no rings, you've already lost. Sorry. Next. See, I told you Carnival Night's bosses sucked. The guardian of the halfway mark of this hellhole is this spinning little bastard here. The way this boss attacks you is by throwing a top attached to its bottom at you and then bouncing it around the arena. The only way to hit it is to force its core open and then pray that you timed it well enough for the top that's been bouncing around to hit it. Speaking of which, this top will slowly take out the floor as you fight, making this boss mainly luck-based. I would say this is fitting for the stage if it was Casino Night Zone, but it's not. Next. Next, we have another boss from Sonic Mania, the Crimson Eye. This boss takes a pretty good fight from Sonic 3 and makes it a lot worse. This thing has been demoted from the core of the Death Egg to simply the core of a random elevator that Eggman uses to get inside of his Superiority Complex machine. The first phase is basically identical to the original Sonic 3 version, which is sadly mainly damage boosting. After that though, any enjoyment you may have had from this boss goes straight to hell with the elevator phase. The boss goes crazy and starts throwing the elevator up and down. If it's going down, you're going to hit the boss. If it's going up, you're not going to hit the boss. There's no way you can control which way the elevator goes. That's for it to decide. Next. This barely counts as a boss, but the game says it is, so I guess it is. This boss takes place at the end of the most annoying level in the original Sonic, so I guess it's fitting that this boss is basically the level not wanting you to leave. Eggman is there, but good luck keeping up with him. The entire boss is you chase him out of Labyrinth Zone as water rises, and the last few traps activate to keep you stuck down there. I guess it's kinda cool that the boss is basically just an Indiana Jones reference, but still, it's not really fun at all. Next. The Egg Spider. As a certified arachnophiliac, you would think I love this boss, but honestly, not really. I'm gonna be honest, the atmosphere is the only cool part about this boss. The storm in the background is a really cool touch to not only the boss, but the level as a whole. Outside of the storm though, this game did Flying Battery dirty. The boss itself is pretty inconvenient too. All you do is try to hit it into the spikes on either side of the arena. The physics are really uncomfortable though, and it's pretty much impossible to do correctly without the spinning poles. I think this boss could have been a lot more fun if the bouncer to hit it was in a more convenient place. Next. This boss can only kill you by making you drown. If you get hit, you're going to collect your rings no matter what. A lot of the fight is damage boosting. It'll sit on its little pedestal and mix you around underwater, which as long as you haven't been stupid, won't drown you. Then it'll spin around the arena twice. You can't really hit it in this state without getting hurt yourself, but that doesn't really matter considering that you're pretty much guaranteed to get your rings back when you get hit. Next. This is exactly like the boss in Sonic 3, except there's a part of it that actually can kill you. The first phase has you flowing down a large corridor while trying to hit the bombs into Eggman's mech. When they collide with it, they release air bubbles, buying you a little more time. The second phase also requires you to be a bit more careful since you're likely going in without a lot of rings. That's because if you get hit at all during the first phase, say goodbye to any rings you might have had. Next. I'm pretty sure an actual child could beat this boss. I say this because my stupid little 6-year-old self beat this on her first try without getting hit. I remember the good old days when I would move left slightly and jump, then move right slightly, then move left slightly again and jump, then move right slightly again. You can't even hit this boss outside the hit it takes to activate it. After that, you're basically just watching it destroy itself because no one told Eggman that friction was a thing. I'm really glad this game doesn't have any realistic sound effects, because I'd hate to know what the constant grinding would sound like. I can't really think of anything else to say about this boss, so... next. They really did Flying Battery dirty. While this boss is better than the spider, it's only because it's shorter. In this fight, you get stuck in a trash compactor and have to hit the laser at the top of the screen in order to get out. The problem is, the laser is too high up to reach normally, so you have to use enemies to get up to it. At first. The issue is that every time the walls get closer, the trash gets pushed up, making it easier to hit the laser. Not only that, but it's pretty much impossible to lose your rings in this fight because of how close together the walls are, making this fight basically impossible to lose. Next. What's your favorite part of each day? Showering? Going to bed? Or perhaps it's something more unique, like waiting for the bus. Well, if it is, then you're going to love Egg Ball. That's all this boss is. Stand on a platform and wait for him to come. Or maybe he won't. I always love it when that happens while I'm fighting this boss. There's even a fake ball, which makes it harder. Ooh. Next. Even more waiting. Do you like watching a worm do acrobatics around the screen for a few minutes while you wait for it to get close to you? Then you'll love this boss. The only reason that this boss is a little higher is because it's related to the Heavy Magician, and I love her. It also has a second variation in Knuckles Mania, but even then it's not that good. Next. This is it. You're about to get to the climactic finale of Sonic 3. But first you have to fight this piece of shit. This is the Death Ball, a giant gravity manipulator with shields. Yeah, that's about all this boss can do. You're supposed to lead the enemies in the arena into it to damage it. There's no other way to damage it than that. It's super tedious and just not that fun, especially with what happens right after it. Next. I could beat this boss blindfolded, and I have. This boss is basically just move to the left, move one block to the right, hit him, repeat. The only time it can catch you off guard even a little bit is if you're not paying attention and Eggman hits the block you're on immediately after the last one. Even then, I'm pretty sure a monkey could beat this boss given enough time. At least it's simple and isn't that painful to fight though. Next. This boss takes a cool concept from the original Sonic Advance and makes it worse. A reoccurring theme in many Sonic games. I love Chaos Angel, but goddamn, this boss isn't that good. How to win? It's simple. Jump on Gemro in his stupid bitch-ass face and the ball will drop like a 9-month-old boy's. If he comes towards you, just move out of the way. Next. The drill thing from Sonic 3. This boss is cool in concept. Having to use Sonic and Tails together to hit Eggman as he's flying away is actually a really cool idea. But in practice, it's boring as shit. To hit the boss, all you have to do is dodge a very easy to avoid drill and then jump into him. If you fall while doing so, Tails just saves you. Next. Have you ever played Sonic Spinball? It's actually really fun. A bit tedious at times, maybe a little unfair, but pretty fun once you get used to it. Well, imagine that, but not good. Yeah, this boss is basically just a giant pinball machine. The boss shares in the fact that it's pretty much impossible to lose. Eggman occasionally will throw a very easy to avoid bomb down the middle of the track, and there are spikes at the bottom, but other than that, as long as you know how to move and jump, this boss is very easy to win. They didn't even know what to do when you beat him. Every boss is supposed to take 3 hits to defeat, so once you get to the top, you just hit him 3 times instantly and win. Next. This is another boss with a pretty cool concept, but pretty lackluster gameplay. You're trying to get into the Sand Temple to uncover the secrets of Angel Island, but the Guardian stops you. Honestly, this boss gets a lot of points for atmosphere, but that's really only the category it gets points in. You can't actually hit this boss, just knock it back. You're supposed to knock it into the sand, but if you just kinda sit in the quicksand, it'll follow you to its death. Next. Our first boss from a 3D Sonic game. We've still got so many to go. Who could this be? Oh, that makes sense. Do you like waiting and disappointment? Then you'll love this boss. The Ghost King will chase you around for a bit, and you have to hit the hourglass behind him in order to turn the lights on in the room. The problem is, if you get too close, he'll turn around, while also making the most ear-splittingly horrible sound in the world. So you have to wait around for what feels like an eternity until he feels like doing the one attack that lets you get close to the hourglass. Once you hit it, you then have to dig into the ground in order to actually hit him. It's kind of a cool use of Knuckles' dig ability, but it can also be really stressful. Next. Another boss from Sonic Adventure 2? People really like this game. What could be so bad about... Oh, that makes sense. The mech stages in Sonic Adventure 2 are already the bane of my existence, and this boss being the final test of your skills doesn't help. A lot of people have already talked about this boss, so I'll keep it short. Your opponent can use any special he wants whenever he wants, and you get no rings, meaning if you get hit one too many times, it's over. The only lenience you get is a little explosive in the middle of the screen, which honestly isn't that useful. A lot of people have this tedious strategy of trying their best to avoid his bullets while shooting at just the right angle to hit him, but I just spam the shoot button and eventually one of us will die. Next. My boy. Look how they've massacred my boy. The Egg Dragoon is probably one of the most creative and cool bosses in the Sonic series. You get to fight it 3 times, and this one is objectively the worst. It starts out with pretty much a worse copy of Sonic 1's first boss, and then throws you into a tennis match with Eggman. The only thing that he even does that's related to Egg Dragoon is he can shoot drills at you. Honestly, you could put almost any flying enemy over the Egg Dragoon here and it would still work. So why include it? It's simple, so you can show it off in the trailers. Next. How is this a boss? I want you to sit me down and explain to me what about this fight constitutes it as a boss battle. Shut the fuck up. In this fight, you have to fight your way through a bunch of enemies while trying not to die. That's it. The atmosphere is kinda cool here, but the music, it sucks. After an actual 10 minutes of fighting, you get to move on. I almost gave this fight lenience because Hang Castle is my favorite area in Sonic Heroes, but no, I'm not that shallow. Next. This is the exact same as Robot Storm, except it's earlier in the game, so it's shorter. Next. Alright, so for the Deadly Six, to save time I'm gonna count each of their fights as one because I'm really lazy. I like Xena. The little character that she had was kinda cool, and she had Sonic deliver one of the best lines in the series. Despite that though, all her fights suck. The first one I think is actually impossible to die in. That's not a joke. I tried, and I think the only way you could actually die in this fight is to let the timer run out. Her second fight takes 2 seconds to defeat because she leaves herself vulnerable the entire time, and the last fight against her is where you're on a seesaw. The only thing you have to do to avoid getting hit here is stay close to her when she jumps, which you're going to do anyways because you're trying to hit her. Next. The first fight on this list for my favorite Sonic game is the second against Iblis. If you didn't guess this one, you probably thought Silver, and don't worry, he's coming soon. This fight is worse though, considering that all you do in this fight is wait. No joke, one time when I was fighting this boss, I literally brought my dad in and had him talk about World War II movies with me so I wouldn't go insane from boredom. While you're fighting Iblis, you might as well get up and get a snack. If you don't have anything at home, you should have enough time to go to the grocery store. If you want to make a full course meal, you should have enough time for that too. Not to mention you have to fight this boss twice. The only thing I like about this boss is that its design is actually pretty cool. I know it can be a little jarring at first from Iblis going from a giant monster to worm, but it makes sense. He was fresh from a defeat from Silver and was gaining back his strength, so he's a little weaker in this form. His final attack is also pretty cool and actually scared me the first time I fought him. Other than that though, I'll fight. Next. The champion of the F tier, the best of the worst I would say, is the Octo Submarine from Sonic Mania. This boss is kinda cool, but the oil physics really messes with me. If you get hit by the boss at all, well, say goodbye to your rings. When I was first playing Sonic Mania as a kid, I had to replay Oil Ocean Zonus an entirely, like, 5 times because I kept running out of lives when fighting this boss. If you're not an idiot, it's not too difficult to dodge his attacks, though. That being said, it just mixes 2 mediocre bosses from classic Sonic games and makes them worse. I did find something pretty cool recently, though. If you bring a fire shield all the way to the boss, you can actually light the oil on fire, causing it to do a pretty funny animation. Next. Well, that was F tier. Up next we have the E tier. While these fights aren't ones I wish weren't in the game, they're more so just fights that I don't really care about and just see as a gateway to the next stage. To start off the E tier, we have the second Hammer Tank variation from the Sonic Advance series. I don't really like the bosses in Sonic Advance that much, and this one isn't doing them any favors. It's the first boss, so it gets away with being simplistic, but it's pretty meh. Next. I hate Labyrinth Zone so much. Sonic 4 is one of the most hated games in the series, and I can't exactly say I don't know why. This boss is basically just try not to get crushed, and if you do, then there's nothing you can do about it. After Eggman's done trying to crush you, then you get the chance to hit him. There's not really much to say about this boss other than that. Next. This boss is meh. Eggman drops bombs on the seesaws and you have to launch them back at him. It takes some getting used to, but it's doable. It can be pretty annoying though, and it takes a while if you don't know what you're doing. Next. The first battle against Sonic on this list. This battle is honestly pretty simple. Using Silver's psychic abilities, you can throw your surroundings at him. It's probably the easiest boss in the game and can be beaten in 15 seconds if you're really good. Next. I think this boss was made last when Sonic Advance was being made because it's pretty clear the creators are running out of ideas, similarly to how this script will get worse and worse as you continue watching it because of how burnt out I'm getting. Yeah, it's Eggman, attached to a spring. He bounces, that's pretty cool. What else am I supposed to say here? Next. Tidal Tempest is one of my favorite areas in Sonic CD, especially with the amazing soundtrack. The boss is pretty mediocre though. Eggman creates bubbles around himself and you have to get rid of them before you can hit him. The problem is you have to hit the bubbles to survive, so what was the point of that? I get they're supposed to be in the way, but they're barely a hazard. The only offense Eggman offers is lasers, which can be a little bit difficult to avoid if you're really dumb. Next. This boss is kinda cool. It's a drill. That's about it though. It drills into the ceiling and then you have to watch out for debris. Again, you're only in danger of getting hit if you're an idiot. Also, apparently Sega really likes this boss because this is actually the second time we fight it. We fight it in Sonic 2 as well. Speaking of which, next. I bet this one was hard to guess. The only reason this one is higher than the other one is because the atmosphere is better. I really didn't like Marble Garden's atmosphere that much. Then again, there is a much cooler hidden stage within this stage. Next. Okay, let's talk about this boss for a second. This boss gets a shit ton of points for music and atmosphere. The music that plays during this fight has no right to be as good as it is. It really sells the feeling that this is the final fight. The boss itself, on the other hand, isn't that good, sadly. It's pretty easy and not really that creative. Having said that, it's still fun as hell to fight, especially with the atmosphere. It really feels like a final boss, even if we still have one stage to go for the true finale. Next. The first boss of Sonic 3 was pretty cool story-wise. This is the thing that's burning down the forest of this beautiful island and now you have to stop it. Outside of that though, it's pretty forgettable. I genuinely forgot what its attacks were and had to look back through the footage for this video to remember what they were. Next. The background of this boss is pretty cool. Outside of that, there's not much to say about it. It shoots balls at you and you have to hit them back. This boss calls itself a pinball machine when it's really just like a tennis ball launcher, like the kind you had to constantly run away from as a kid in PE class. Next. This boss was one I could never get past as a kid, so I might be a little biased for ranking it so low, but fuck off. This boss is simple. When Eggman hits the totem poles, use the arrows to get high up enough to hit him. A pretty simple concept, but as a kid, if you held me at gunpoint and told me to beat the boss, I still wouldn't have been able to figure out the timing of those goddamn arrows. Next. Wow, the first final boss on this list. Almost every Sonic game does a really good job of playing up the final boss. Even games like Forces and Colors have a big cinematic moment that really sets the mood. Sonic 1 and Sonic CD don't though. Both final bosses feel like they could just be normal boss fights in their respective games. CD does an even worse job of this because in the American soundtrack they didn't even make a special track for it. The same music plays in this boss that does in all of the other bosses, and if you know anything about the American boss music in this game, yeah. Now, as a boss, it's not that terrible, but as a final boss, come on. You could tell me that there was a secret boss after this that's unlocked by collecting all of the time stones and I'd believe you. That's not even from a removed sense. If you told me right now, with the knowledge that I have, that this wasn't the actual final boss, I'd still probably hear you out. Next. The Egg Mixer, but with bombs. This boss isn't too bad. It's basically the worst boss in the series, but in reverse, which somehow makes it a lot more fun. Jump on the descending platforms to get him. It's a pretty cool concept, but when you actually end up doing it, there's not much to it. It's still fun for the first few seconds, though. Next. Ice. Next. Just kidding. This boss is actually kind of tricky at first. You have to memorize the pattern that he shoots his ice gas out in. Once you memorize that, you can't lose anymore. Next. No, I'm for real this time. Next! Have you ever heard the term damage boosting? That's what you're going to be doing for the majority of this fight. Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's a really good and immersive battle that you can experience without cheating that a lot of people worked really hard on. Too bad no one has ever seen it. Next. Jump on the platforms when they come out at you at the right time, and then ride them until they reach Eggman's cockpit. This is just a 2D version of that one attack that Egg Viper uses. We'll be getting to that boss in a couple hours, don't worry. Next. Now for the easiest boss in Sonic 2. After making your way through the only realistic depiction of the state of Arkansas I've seen in any video game, you arrive at the easiest boss in said game. He comes out of the lava, and after you hit him about 4 times he tries to shoot fire at you. He comes out of the lava again, and then you win. Next. Have you ever wanted to beat the shit out of Bob the Builder? Well, now you can. He spends most of his time sitting there, completely vulnerable. If you don't hit him fast enough, he'll throw his wrench at you, and if you're really unlucky, he'll do a special attack, which can be avoided by walking a little bit in any direction. Next. Really? It took us this long to get to a boss from Sonic Colors? Well, yes, but that's because while the bosses in Colors aren't that fun, at least they're short. Take Ferris Wheel, for example. You can defeat them in about 30 seconds if you really want to. This is also the last game where Eggman's best theme is heard in, which makes me die a little on the inside. Next. It's a Rotatron, but you actually have to try. The addition of the saw blades is pretty cool, but the boss still goes down really fast. Something copyright. Next. To cap off one of the most creative Sonic levels, we have to battle Chainsaw Man. This fight is pretty cool. You have to bait him into hitting boxes, then you hit him. If you're really good though, or just like damage boosting, you can kill him without worrying about the boxes. Next. The Egg Apple. I have no idea why I call it this. I've been calling it this since I was a kid, and I genuinely don't know why. It's blue. Apples aren't blue. It's a lot more pear-shaped than apple-shaped. None of its moves have anything to do with apples, except trees? Its purpose is just to be an energy generator as well. And last time I checked, apples can't even create enough energy to power a light bulb. The boss itself is pretty forgettable. Don't hit the spikes and you're good to go. Seriously, why the fuck do I call it the Egg Apple? Next. To end off one of the coolest levels in Sonic, we have an alright boss. Eggman flies just out of range of you hitting him, and the screen in the background pulls up weather forecasts. Each forecast will lead to a different attack. 2 of them aren't that helpful, but when it overheats, that's when it's really time to shine. I love climate change. Next. Trumpet. If you fall into a random pit in Mystic Cave, you end up finding the hidden Palace Zone. Not the one in Sonic 3, the other one. Lore implications aside, this place is pretty cool. The boss is pretty forgettable though. Eggman has a trumpet, and you can use it to drop spikes on you. Your guess is as good as mine. Next. The unofficial ending of Sonic Advance has a just great final boss. Bonus points for music though, like the developers seriously went all out with the chiptune of this game. The boss will cycle through 3 different attacks, each one decided by the ring around the shaft. I'm not gonna make the joke. It takes some doing, but the boss is beatable after a couple tries. Next. The champion of the E tier is Silver from Sonic 06. I know that this tier is supposed to be about largely forgettable bosses, but how could you forget about this guy? Just try to forget it existed. It's no use. You will need intense therapy after fighting him for the first time, and the second time in Shadow's story. So why is it this high up? Because I love him. Silver is the best character in the series, and you can't say otherwise. He should be the main protagonist, not this blue cunt. Stay away from my child. He's mine. I don't know, I think I just get really defensive whenever I'm around this fictional anthropomorphic hedgehog. Is that so weird? Next. Alright, now we have the D tier. This is for bosses that are pretty mediocre, but there is some fun to be had here and there. Let's see it. To kick off the D tier, we have the Egg Flower from Sonic 4. In this boss, you have to use a Tails' flight ability to hit its core whenever it opens up while avoiding the vines. The boss is pretty good, but at its roots there's not much to it. Next. This boss is really easy. If you go to the right side of the screen when it's spawning, you can kill it instantly. If you don't do that though, it's a little challenging with the shields, but not by that much. So why is it so high? It's simple. Look at its design. Does it remind you of anything? That's right, this boss is actually a prototype for the Death Egg robot. So that's cool. Next. This is the first fight against Knuckles on this list. I'm sure you can see why. It's not very good. You hit him, and then you hit him again. One more time should do it, and yeah, he's done. Next. Gamma is a silly little guy. I really like his levels. His boss, on the other hand, it's alright. It's pretty easy though. The only hard part is that he has a gun. Next. The last of the character battles in Sonic Adventure 1. He can homing attack you, but his homing attack is nerfed. He can spin dash a little bit also, so that's cool. Next. If I had a quarter for every time I fought a Sonic boss that shot bombs at you and nothing else, I'd have a lot of quarters. This follows the Sonic Advance formula of running after the boss and trying not to die. He shoots bombs at you and you have to run forwards or backwards to not get hit. After breaking off his cannon, he goes full Dr. Wily and throws bombs everywhere. Have fun! Next. It's the first boss of Sonic 1 except with ugly graphics. The homing attack takes out the majority of the challenge in this fight too. Next. A boss from Sonic 2 but worse. Again, the homing attack takes out all of the challenge in this fight. It's higher than the other bosses though because it has one attack which is actually a little hard to avoid. Still though, it's pretty easy. Next. Alright, end of the level. Wait, this is Act 1. Why is there a capsule? Oh well, it's probably fine. Oh shit. If you ever wanted to fight one of the capsules at the end of each area, now's your chance. You don't actually ever get the chance to hit it though, you just need to get it to hit itself. Just stand on its top and when it's about to hit you, run under it and you're good. This is the only boss fight in Sonic 3 I was able to beat as a kid without getting hit. Next. This is the champion of F tier but better. It has all the good stuff in the boss and none of the bad stuff. It also mixes elements from the boss of Hillbilly Zone, but giving you less of an opportunity to hit it. All around, it's pretty alright. Next. Have you ever been a bowling pin? This boss will help you understand their pain. You have to jump on the platform that comes out whenever Eggman launches a bowling ball at you, but every once in a while he'll throw a curveball at you and throw one from above. So watch out. Next. The first boss in Sonic Advance. It's pretty cool as a concept, especially to get more people into the classic style of gameplays after years of modern games. Having said that, there's a lot of room to grow here. It's still fun for what it's worth though. Next. Smokey the Bear is rolling in his grave right now. This boss is special to me because it's the first boss I ever tried to draw as a kid. It wasn't very good. This boss attacks you by chopping down the rainforest. Avoid the logs and you'll be fine though. Next. This is definitely the best variation of the drillers in Sonic 2 and 3. Instead of it being a little driller, it's a big driller with armor now. You're not able to hit it until after its shields come down after it gets hit by the lava several times. Once the shield is down, you can continue hitting it, but if it's too hot, you'll be the one taking damage. It's pretty fun, but it ends up boiling down to a lot of waiting. Next. This boss was one that took me forever to get past as a kid. Beating it is simple though. Hit him whenever he gets close and then jump on the other platform. Continue to do this until he's dead. Next. This is basically the same boss as the one in Sonic 1, except the platforms are inverted. Instead of having two platforms on one side and lava in the middle, you have one platform in the middle and disappearing platforms on the sides. I also find it funny that you can get Eggman to drop his cancer chemicals on himself if you move around him at just the right pace. Next. Ice and asexual reproduction. Next. Next! That's right, the first boss of Sonic 2 somehow managed to drive its way all the way up here. Yes, it's purely because of nostalgia. This was not only the first Sonic boss I ever fought, but the first boss I fought in a game, period. It's pretty good for a first boss too. All you have to do is jump until the end where it throws a curveball at you by launching its drill. This exploded my child brain, and I have a lot of happy memories of it. Next. If you have a fire shield going into this boss, you've already won. If not, it's still pretty easy. It makes sense though, considering it's the first main boss of Sonic 3. It's kinda cool to have to jump over death pits for a brief moment to hit him. After that, it's kinda over. Still pretty fun though. Next. Repeatedly hit Eggman on the balls until you win. Just don't hit them while they're electric. Next. Eggman has different tools that he can use against you on his ring here. They're all pretty easy to avoid though. Some of them are pretty interesting though, and make it hard for you to get in close. It's pretty memorable, but that's just because of its design. Next. The final boss of Sonic 4, as well as the second final boss on this list. While it's pretty cool to team up with Tails in order to get in close, that's all this boss has going for it. It only has 2 attacks, and that is to electrify the wheels around itself and to create a force field and try to hit you. Other than that though, that's about it. This final boss does fit well for how underwhelming Sonic 4 is though. Next. Finally, gravity done right in a Sonic boss. Here you have to fight Eggman, while also changing the way gravity works in order to get close to him. It's a pretty simple boss, but it's also really fun. Next. Okay, hear me out here. Zaz has at least one cool fight, and here's why. While his first 2 fights are pretty easy and boring, his last fight is actually pretty cool. He expands on the star mechanic from his first fight and makes it even cooler by launching them at you himself. Like his own projectiles. Avoiding these is slightly more difficult and can be a lot of fun. It is pretty easy, but hey, it's still better than Xena. Next. What if the lightning bug enemies in Sonic CD were, like, really big? Asked one Sega employee, completely obliviously to what he had just created. The boss isn't that difficult, and mainly involves defeating menial enemies as you wait for the big guy to come out. You only have to go through a couple of cycles in order to defeat him, though. Next. This boss is called Egg Scara, but he's basically a dung beetle. He rolls up his own shit and then throws it at you. You then have to knock his shit back into him. Repeat until dead. Next. Another boss from Sonic Adventure. In this boss, you take on the tornado and have to attempt to board a shockingly phallic-looking airship to stop Eggman. While trying to get on Eggman's dick, though, it's armed with its own attack. You've been hit by its super laser fist before and won't let it hit you a second time. While it's pretty easy, the amount of jokes that it delivers to my doorstep lets it hold its place here. Next. Mean Bean Machine reference. This boss was pretty easy for me considering that game raised me. There is a fun glitch at the end though that forces you to restart the level, so that's fun if you're into that. Next. Okay, I know what you were thinking. The fight against Sonic was way lower than this. Why is it so high up? Well, it's simple. It's a lot more difficult to get the items in this area, and Shadow can enter his Ultra Instinct form if you take too long. Next. This boss is kind of fun. Sonic and the Secret Rings may be my least favorite Sonic game, but the boss fights are alright. This boss is simple. Rip his horn off while chasing him down. It's actually pretty brutal seeing it in action. I remember this making me freeze up as a kid. Next. This is the first boss in the 3DS version of Sonic Colors. It's certainly a boss. It's pretty easy, but also kind of fun. All you have to do is hit its arms over and over again until it stops existing. The only wisp that you have access to yet in this game is the boost wisp, so there's not much creativity in them yet. Next. This boss does what most bosses in this game can't do. It has a refight of a boss that's actually creative and fun. While this boss is the successor of Glowbot, hitting it is actually pretty different. You have to make use of the drill whips to tunnel up to it once it's in the right spot, so it's actually a nice addition. Next. This boss is actually pretty fun. You have to get onto its back when its guard is down and then steer it into the walls to do damage. In Sonic's story, if you steer it into a statue, you'll do even more damage. It can actually be pretty difficult to steer at times too. In Shadow's story, it's even harder to steer because there are no statues to steer into it. All in all, a pretty good guard dog for Eggman, that we get to brutally murder. Twice. Next. The champion of the D tier and the final boss of Sonic's story is the Egg Wyvern. This boss is actually broken into 2 halves. The first half is a lot more like Egg Cerberus, while the second half is actually fun. Each time you hit him, Eggman will get rid of a few of the platforms you're using, like in Sonic Adventure. For the first part, once he dashes at you, you need to grab his horn and lead him around the arena in order to do damage. Unfortunately, this is entirely luck-based. You're supposed to find a piece of debris from the egg carrier to hit him with, but they all fall too fast for you to get to, meaning you just have to get lucky and hope one appears right by you. In his second phase it gets easier though, where you simply have to hit his guns to get to him. His final attack is especially cool because he dashes at you and you have to get to him before he kills you. The end of the boss is really fun too, watching him fall out of the sky with his chair. Next. Alright guys, I just want to make something very clear right now. I am fucking fuming! Nathaniel Bandy recently made a video very similar to this one. And I just want to make it clear right now, I'm not copying him. I've had this video planned since March. He actually copied me, but from the future, as someone who he has no idea exists and could have no possible way of knowing that I was planning on doing this. So take that, fucking, you fucking loser. And mine has over 200. Well, my video has 5 times the amount of boss fights your video has. You respectable human being. You're great guy. I really like you. I think you're a great person. I watched your videos all the time as a kid. Yeah, just take that, you fucking beautiful human being. The C tier is reserved for bosses that are pretty fun, but nothing to write home about. This is the absolute peak of mediocrity, but there are a few gems near the end. To kick off the C tier, we have Sonic 3's variation of the first boss of Sonic 1. This one doesn't change much, except for the fact that it has less health and is piloted by Mecha Sonic. I'll make more points about it when we get to the actual boss. Next. I'm sorry, but if you couldn't guess this one from context, you're a dumbass. This boss is pretty easy, but it's actually a really good first boss. It's very good at its job of introducing the player to how bosses in this game will work. You have to hit Eggman, but afterwards weave below the Wrecking Ball to not get hit. It's pretty simple, but nice. A good C tier boss. Next. Man, I love Sunset Hill. Wait, what's that in the distance? Holy shit! For this boss, it's basically either you hit it or it hits you. It is so unbelievably massive that it comes out of nowhere and it first attacks too. It's pretty fun to fight after the initial shock though. Next. This is a fight that is exclusive to Knuckles Mania. This is also the only time you fight Heavy King in base form. He uses the Master Emerald in order to attack you, and you have to wait until he's vulnerable. While not quite as cool as a certain other boss, it's still pretty solid. Next. Hit Eggman off the platform, but watch out for his bombs. Next. At first, I hated this boss, but it's grown on me a lot. While it's difficult to dodge everything at once you realize how to thread that needle, it's really fun. It almost feels like you're really jousting with the writer. Unfortunately, many players won't get that feeling when they fight her because of how difficult it can be to dodge her attacks, and the lack of consequences for doing so she's stuck in C tier. Next. You finally made it. After this long journey, you finally arrived at the heart of Angel Island, the Hidden Palace. There's just one thing standing between you and saving this world. Knuckles. He's been a massive trickster for the entire game, pushing you into pits and causing all sorts of chaos. Now it's time for some well overdue payback. Knuckles isn't holding back though either. He's going all out to protect the meaning of his life. This would be a pretty cool scene in a movie. Next. This fight is actually pretty fun. You have to get rid of his shielded head and then hit his weak spot, while also having to avoid getting stung by his arms. He slowly inches closer and closer to you until you defeat him, causing a light amount of stress. Next. This technically doesn't count as a Death Egg robot because it's just a recycled model. The first part of the fight is just survival, and then the second part of the fight is very easily turning the scrap metal back into scrap. Visually it's cool, but gameplay-wise there's much to be desired. Next. Now onto a Death Egg robot that isn't as terrible. The official first boss of Sonic Mania is pretty alright. You have to climb his arms and do damage to his head, but if you get too close he'll throw bombs at you instead. I like how if you take too long the world just ends. Next. Ah yes, the second most forgettable boss in Sonic 3. What's the most forgettable? I forgot. The Twin Hammer is pretty fun to fight, considering you have to dodge it and wait for it to slow down. It's like a damage boost boss, but there's no way to damage boost. Next. It's HD. In this fight against the Twin Hammer, instead of fighting 1 and then 2, you fight 2 and then 1. It's not as hard as the Twin Hammer, but it gets points for its HD-ness. I also have very fond memories of eating waffles longingly while watching people fight this boss as I waited for Sonic Mania to come out. Next. Egg. Next. Okay, I'll do an actual explanation. In this fight, you fight Eggman, but he has backup Egg. Every time you hit him, an egg bursts, and the miracle of life occurs. You then have to brutally murder an infant. You have to do this 7 times to beat the boss. After that, Eggman shoots a laser at you, and then the fight's pretty much over. Next. The first phase of this boss is identical to the others. What makes it different is in the second phase. Eggman goes crazy and starts throwing a baker's dozen at you. You then have to dodge the newborns as you make your way up to Eggman in order to defeat him. Next. Man, Sonic Forces is going to be so cool. I can't wait to fight Chaos, Shadow, Zavok, and Metal Sonic again. Oh. I can actually fight Zavok! This is going to be so much fun! What the fuck is this? Despite having Zavok plastered onto the boss, the fight is literally not against Zavok. Rather, you're fighting a giant B-bot with Zavok on top of it. The fight itself is alright though. You have to dodge lasers and other B-bots in order to get close and then hit Zavok. The only issue I have with this fight is that Zavok does not have to be present in the fight for it to still work. The only reason they put Zavok here was so they could say they have a fight against Zavok. And honestly, I'm surprised that with Forces, they even went that far, considering that they didn't let us fight Chaos or Shadow either. Next. That's right, Zavok, you lost to a fucking pinball machine. Do better. This boss is pretty fun. You can't hit Eggman from the sides or the bottom, and you can only hit him from the very top. That means you have to use the flippers on the sides in order to hit him. It's actually pretty fun, even if it's not that hard. Next. This boss is pretty nice. You have to chase Eggman into the ceiling and then hit him. He's not that hard to hit because the meat of this fight comes from just getting to him. You have to chase him into the sky 3 times. Each time he gets closer and closer to the ceiling until he gets stuck. Once he's there, he escapes, but the cinematic at the end is still pretty cool. Next. My depressed little Scrimblow. Zor is certainly a silly little guy. His boss fights are alright too. His first boss was impossible for me to beat as a kid because I didn't know how to kick. He does a good job at keeping himself from being vulnerable though. His second fight is probably the worst though, considering all you have to do is turn on the lights, which we've discovered is not possible to do with apples. His third fight is really just survival to make it all the way to the top. Once you do, you hit the switch and he finally gets what he craves most. Death. Next. This boss is pretty good atmospherically. You've just made it onto the Wing Fortress, and after going through the hardest level in Sonic 2, you've arrived at the penultimate trial. It looks simple at first, but then you realize you have to use the cups in the arena in order to make your way up to the laser blaster. Once you get there, you have to hit it while it's not firing. This is actually a really creative approach to a boss. I like it a lot. Next. This is basically the really annoying and unfair boss from later in the game, but not really annoying and unfair. While it's a lot easier, it's still pretty fun to battle the other character. It reminds me of the mech fights from Sonic Adventure 1. Next. This is a pretty alright boss. You have to dodge his missiles and then bait him into hitting the ground. Once you hit him, he gets back up and the cycle repeats. It's cool to see how Sonic and Tails interact with their bosses in their own ways. Next. This boss starts out simplistic. At first it just looks like a worse version of the boss from Sonic 2, but that's only the first half. After that you have to get to the top of the crashing flying battery. Then you have to defeat Eggman as he's hanging on the rail you're on. While he's pretty easy to hit, the boss is still pretty fun. Next. The first boss in one of the most underrated Sonic games. While Knuckles is pretty fun to battle with, he's a lot more brash and clumsy than the other knights, making him pretty easy to defeat. I still love the fact that he asks you to kill him at the end of the fight though. Next. This boss revolves around defeating Eggman by jumping onto his platforms and hitting him. Eggman will try to hit you with his missiles as you get closer to him. This is one of the easier bosses in the game, but it's still fun. Next. I love that this boss uses a pretty overlooked mechanic in Sonic CD and makes it into a weapon. As you hit the boss, it drops toy versions of the bosses from Sonic 1 and 2. It also drops toy versions of Amy to latch onto and explode. Once you get rid of all the toys, he comes down, dropping fire everywhere. Then you hit the switch one more time and drop him from the toy machine. Next. This is alright for a first boss. Very simplistic though. Eggman throws his head at you and then you have to hit him while he's down. Once you hit him enough time, he dies. Next. The first battle against Infinite on this list, and unquestionably the worst. Basically this fight will either be way too hard or way too easy, whether or not you're using Wispons. It's the only 2D fight against Infinite. If you get hit by his cyber blocks, then you get taken to cyberspace and have to dodge his attacks. Honestly, I'd like to forget this boss exists. Not only does it have the worst gameplay of all the Infinite fights, but it also has the worst music. Next. General. I would actually die if I counted all of his fights individually, so I'm pushing them all into one. General actually gets really tough near the end. It's really fun to fight him. Next. No, this isn't the really good one. That one's much higher up. This is the first time you fight him. It's pretty fun, but he's also pretty weak. Next. It's beta but stronger. Next. It's delta but stronger. Next. I know it's pretty weird to see a boss from Sonic Frontiers this low, but it's the most controversial boss in the game. People either really love this boss or really hate it. It's Ghost from Sonic Frontiers. I'm on the side of people who really hate it. Ghost will slowly take away your rings as you get to the area you need to be in order to defeat them. The issue is that they're constantly attacking you and you need to avoid them. If you get hit by them at all, you fall all the way back down, making this boss more tedious than fun. Next. The first fight against another team in Sonic Heroes. It's really fun because if you lose a teammate, they don't come back. Obviously, the same goes for the other team, so you better hope to God you don't get stuck with nothing but the flying type, or you've basically already lost. Next. One of Black Doom's goons that you have to fight if you go against him. Despite the fact that he's one of the highest ranking members of the Black Arms, he's really weak. Once you get enough weaponry, you can take him down really easily. Next. This boss is stressful as hell and I love it. You have to carefully jump on the falling ice spikes in order to hit him. You're underwater the entire time though, so you need to get up fast and not drown, which can get very nerve-wracking. Next. This boss is right before Wing Fortress Zone. You have to fight Metal Sonic in order to get onto the ship. He goes pretty all out though by spamming lasers everywhere. It's fun in a masochistic way. Next. That's right, Zama managed to wriggle his fat ass all the way up to C tier. We all know he doesn't deserve it, but he got it anyways. His first fight has you diving onto the giant face while avoiding spikes and then hitting him. In his second fight he turns into a tornado and you have to chase him around in drill form. His final fight is what really gets him his place here though. He spews yellow orbs everywhere and you have to lead him into the lava while he's tunneling under in order to hit him. It's honestly kind of charming. Next. Heavy Shinobi is pretty fun. He starts off the fight by immediately freezing you. You then have to hit him from below as he's jumping in order to do damage. I like this fight because you're really in a ninja battle. Both of you are attempting to defeat the other before the other can make their next move. Next. The final boss of Sonic 1. Like Sonic CD, this boss feels more like a generic boss than the actual finale. This one is better than the one in CD though because it has different music than the other bosses and has actual build-up. Though this boss is mainly reliant on its crushers and it has only 2 attacks, it's still kind of climactic. Especially at the end where you get to hit Eggman into the abyss. Next. Another Sonic Advance 2 boss, except this one is actually really fun. Here you have to jump onto Eggman's platforms and hit his core. The kicker is there are 2 types of platforms. The red ones create spikes while the blue ones spin every once in a while, making it hard to hit. Next. This boss is pretty cool because you first have to take his ship down and then take out his soldiers before being able to hit him. You can then use the drill wisp in order to get the better of him from below. Next. This boss is pretty similar to its other variation, except you're underwater, meaning you need to get air. It's fun to guide missiles into the ship and then use the drill wisp to attack the Mad Sailor. Next. This is a pretty cool variation of the GUN bosses in Sonic Adventure 2, except now you have weapons, which makes it a touch easier. It's still really fun to tear it to shreds though. Next. This boss is fun because it has a couple of different variations. In Sonic's variation of it, you have to get up to the Golem's head and take it down from there. In Eggman's variation, you have to open its chest and shoot the bombs inside in order to defeat it. Next. Okay, I have some choice words for the person who wrote the music for this fight. This is the easiest variation of the boss, but the music. The fucking music. I can feel it in my soul. It's not a difficult fight at all, but the music plays it up to be the most cinematic event in the series. Why? It's the first boss! Let's move on before I lose my sanity. Next! The final boss of the neutral route of Shadow the Hedgehog. This boss gets a lot of shit, but I really enjoy it. You have to catch up to him and then manipulate the slots on his machine in order to use Chaos Blast to take him down. All in all, a pretty fun fight. Next. This is basically a massive sumo match with Zero and Amy's story of Sonic Adventure. You have to hit him against the electric cage around you in order to hurt him. Then you hit his brain. Do this 3 times to defeat him. There's a really sweet scene at the end though, where Amy's bird can finally be free with his family. Next. This technically doesn't count as another Death Egg variation because time travel. This is actually a pretty cool variation though. After hitting him in the ass a few times, he takes you to the main arena. There you need to trick him into hitting the bombs in the arena in order to make him vulnerable to attack. It's a cool concept, but not quite as good as the original in my opinion. Next. Chaos is one of the coolest characters in the series. All of his bosses are pretty cool, but Chaos 4 kinda sucks. There's not much danger in the entire fight, but it's still pretty fun to have to jump across the water in order to hit him. We really didn't have to fight him 3 separate times though. Next. Scorpion is a pretty fun name. It has a nice fight as well. Having to chase down this giant monster while it's ravaging a city is always fun. Once you hit it in the eye a couple of times, it goes down. It's kinda short, but really nice. Next. Wow, we've really gone this whole time without mentioning a single fight from Unleashed. That's pretty cool. That being said, the Egg Devil Ray is pretty easy. Just boosting and moving when you need to is all you really have to do. Then again, the design and music in the fight more than makes up for it. Next. The Egg Genesis. It's actually a pretty cool boss. At first you have to wait for it to descend for you to actually get an opportunity to hit it. Once you get there are 2 ways you can hit it. You can either do the really stupid option of using its legs to get to the top and then stomp it over and over again, or just jump to the bottom and bound over and over again to hit it. Silver's variation of the fight is really fun as well. You have to grab missiles and then fire them back into it. Once you defeat it, it starts crashing to the ground and you have to run away. Next. The champion of the C tier is the Death Egg Score. The first phase of this fight is largely damage boosting, but once you get past that, it's actually pretty fun. You have to carefully jump towards the core while avoiding lasers it fires out. You can't hit it while it's firing or the platforms will hit you, meaning there's not much of a way to cheese this battle. Next. Finally, we've made it to B tier. This tier contains bosses that are actually pretty good. Let us begin. Another variation of Hyper Stress, but in the good way. Having to climb up and do your best to hit the Egg Chaser is actually pretty fun. If there are no platforms to jump on, then you die. No exceptions. Next. This guy likely has a Blue Lives Matter sticker on the back of his helicopter. Having to weave between the missiles and hit the right type to launch back into the Mad Officer is pretty cool for what it's worth. Still, there's a heavy that's much better than this one. Something police. Next. Another Frontiers boss pretty low. Compared to other bosses in the game though, Shark isn't that good. The whole fight is just a quick time event that goes on for far too long. I genuinely thought I was doing something wrong when I first fought it because of how long it was taking, but nope, it just takes that long. Still, design-wise, it's pretty cool. Next. This is the final boss of Sonic 1 but better, since there are 5 crushers instead of 1, and you know, as they say, more is more. The first phase plays out pretty similarly to the final boss, but in the second phase, all hell breaks loose. The crushers go everywhere and you're never safe until you beat the boss. Next. The biggest egg hammer in Sonic Advance. Eggman and Germ will work together to beat the absolute shit out of you. Once you're able to weave through the hammer though, it's pretty easy to hit the core. Next. No, we're not doing Ifrit from Sonic Rivals, I was too lazy to include that game. This is Ifrit from Secret Rings. Once again, my least favorite Sonic game, but still a really cool boss idea. You have to hit the Ifrit's hands and then its head in order to defeat it. Next. This is a pretty fun boss. You have to grab the ice batteries and then throw them into Chaos's mouth in order to freeze him. At least with Sonic and Knuckles. Big, on the other hand, you have to somehow fish your pet frog out of this monster's mouth. All in all though, it's a pretty cool boss, and the music is awesome too. Next. This battle is really interesting. It feels more like a dance than an actual fight. You and Rouge are constantly attacking and looking for an opening to hit the other. After a few seconds, the floor opens up and you both get thrown upwards. You then have to fly around and try to hit each other, and eventually end up using the railing on the walls to do damage. The boss only takes 4 hits, but it still takes a while because of how elusive they are. Next. The true final boss of Sonic Advance. You have to go to the moon in order to battle Eggman in your super form. This, of course, being the 5th of the 8 epic space final bosses in Sonic games. While this fight is still subpar to Doomsday Zone in my opinion, it's still pretty fun. Next. Turtles! Next. We're not going to talk about the name of this boss. This fight is one that's actually pretty simplistic but fun. Wait for Eggman to come down and then try to position yourself right between his legs so you can thrust into his core. Wait. Next. God, please, next. The very first thing you'll do in Sonic Adventure is fight this monster. While Chaos Zero is one of the easiest bosses in the game, he does a good job of getting the player used to 3D style gameplay. After hitting him the first 2 times, he goes into the air and attacks you from above. There, you have to move quickly to dodge his attacks. I know it's the easiest thing in the world to do, but for a kid who's never played a video game before, I think it's a good introduction. Next. This is it. The big face-off against Black Doom if you've gone against him. There's something so cool about this moment. Black Doom has spent 50 long years planning this invasion, and now the one thing standing between him and domination over the Chaos Emeralds is the one thing he hopes would become his greatest weapon. To both sides of this fight, the opponent is going against someone unbelievably powerful. For Shadow, he's going against a demigod that will destroy the world if you can't stop him. For Black Doom, he's going against what is, in his eyes, the ultimate life form. The fight is pretty cool too. Next. While this boss doesn't have that much to it gameplay-wise, story and atmosphere-wise, it's incredible. Eggman's missiles just failed to destroy Station Quera, and now he's ready to level the city himself. Sonic is off being enlightened about the end of the world or something, so now you, Tails, are the only one in Eggman's way. Tails has spent almost the entire game following Sonic, but no more. Now it's time to finally stand up for yourself and defeat the boss. Eggman feels so menacing in this battle too. His voice, the music, the enormous design of his robot, it's incredible. The only thing holding it back from being A tier is the fight itself isn't that good. It's still a really great scene of character development for Tails though. I hope the later games don't screw it up. Oh my god. Next. Ah yes, the last of the GUN series is the earliest on this list. As much as I like Flying Dog, there are a couple issues with it. Namely, it's so easy. Unlike all the other GUN fights, you don't have to wait for it to become vulnerable, because it's always vulnerable since you can fly. Now, this fight still takes some time to complete and has some difficulty to it, making it actually pretty fun, especially since it's the only GUN fight with a non-speed character. Next. Unfortunately, despite that, I still like the speed battles better. Here we have Bigfoot. He actually makes himself somewhat invulnerable by flying outside of your attack range. I say somewhat invulnerable because if you're really good, you can still use the boxes to get up to Bigfoot while he's flying around and hit him. This is pretty hard to pull off though, and once all the boxes are gone, Bigfoot will spend a lot of the time in the air, unfortunately making this boss just more waiting. Outside of that though, it's pretty fun. Next. Now this is a perfect mix of the two bosses. It takes the action of Flying Dog and the invulnerability of Bigfoot and mixes it perfectly into a really fun and kinda difficult boss, Hotshot. They're definitely the most fun GUN member to fight. I really love how Shadow disses the entire human race after committing a murder. Next. The Squid boss fight is one of the most infuriating bosses in Sonic Frontiers. It's not actually difficult, but when you're first starting off it can catch you off guard. Sound the alarm. One time I died while fighting it because the in-game sun got in my eyes and I couldn't see the bullets it was shooting at me. Still though, the only thing holding this boss back from being A tier is it doesn't make that much use of the game's unique combat system and instead relies on your ability to quick step. Next. Ah yes, the Bio Lizard. I love supporting me and this variation of the boss makes the music even better. Unfortunately, the atmosphere and difficulty doesn't carry over much in this version. Don't worry though, we'll talk about the actual version soon enough. Next. Whoa, put the knife down, let me explain. How did this boss somehow end up in B tier? Well, it's simple. This boss is actually a prototype for the Death Egg Robot Mark II. The giant hand coming down and everything is really cool. It also has a much better version of an attack from the Oil Ocean battle. I honestly think that the hand in this fight might be better than the hand in the final boss because it's a lot harder to cheese. That being said, it's still subpar by comparison. Next. The battle with one of the most infamous Sonic clones, Mecha Sonic. This boss is really fun. His moveset mimics yours very well and it feels like an actual battle. Instead of hitting him until he's dead though, you have to outsmart him and use an actual strategy to win. Or damage boost. Next. Metal Sonic! This is the first time you go against the Cobalt Blur, and boy is it a memorable one. He may know everything you're going to do, but that's not going to help him because you know everything he's going to do. Strange, isn't it? Well, almost everything. This race is going to be neck and neck pretty much no matter what. If you get too far ahead, he'll boost ahead, and if you fall too far behind, he'll burn out and give you more of a shot at the lead. If you fall way too far behind, though, Eggman immediately kills you. This fight is the absolute highlight of Sonic CD, and for good reason. It's really fun, and your reward for winning is... bitches. Hell yeah. Next. The head of Dark Gaia's troops. While Sonic Unleashed has a lot of cool enemy variation, at least across the Gaia types, this is the peak of the base enemy. Though the fight really just boils down to pushing blocks around, the Guardian has such an intimidating aura. This is also the only time in the game where you have to fight base Gaia soldiers without getting interrupted by... God damn it. I'll tell you though, getting to beat the shit out of it at the end of the fight is such a good feeling. Next. Have you ever wanted to shoot Eggman in the face? The Egg Breaker. This boss is called Egg Breaker because it's fun to tear to pieces. While it's not the hardest fight in the world, I don't give a damn. This boss allows you to use pretty much any weapon in the game depending on what mode you're playing on, and once you have your weapon of choice, go ham. Next. This boss is this high up because of its masterful presentation. While pretty simple in concept, there's something so cool about outrunning literal bullets. The way he swoops in to attack actually scared my stupid 9-year-old brain at the time. Having to mash A and B to avoid getting blown away is also a fun perk. Next. Oh, what could have been. While this isn't exactly what I'd call the best possible final boss for Sonic Mania, it still has a lot going for it. Not only are you battling what is basically a far better version of the final boss of Sonic CD, but you're also doing battle with reimagined versions of the battles against the Heavies. I especially like the battle against Heavy Rider. Let's be honest though, most of us just see this battle as a gateway to the true final boss. Next. This boss takes what was good about the former team battle and makes it even better, mainly because this boss is really stressful if you don't pay attention to everything. While the power and flying type do get in the way, what you really need to worry about is the speed character, since they can knock you off the map in one hit if they feel like it. I also love that in Chaotix's campaign you fight Team Rose after Team Dark, meaning that what is usually considered to be the weakest team is stronger than what is considered to be the strongest team. Next. While most people think about the horribly inhumane transformation that Beta was forced to take on in Sonic Adventure, Zeta is even worse. He's forced to act as the battery for a shelter on a crashed ship. At this point you're just putting your younger brother out of his misery. This fight is also on a timer, the same timer that's been ticking down for the entire level, meaning that you have to be quick in order to defeat him. Unlike Beta, whose death is amazingly romanticized, after you defeat him his head pops off and that's that. Next. Ah yes, the final boss of the United States government. This fight is mainly against Diabolon, with Sonic acting as a distraction for you. Just shoot him a couple times and he'll stop bothering you for a bit. Once you defeat Diabolon, you can rejoice, as capitalism is no more. Oh, no. Next. The first boss of Sonic Rush, except with a lot more to it. Bro has missiles, is a lot more fortified now, and learns from his mistakes. To be fair, you're not fighting actual Eggman here though, you're fighting an Eggman with a name that I won't be saying. Next. Another boss from Sonic Frontiers. I'll be combining all of the Tower variants into one because each of them is just a harder version than the previous. While I do love Tower, there's just not that much to it. It does keep you from killing it instantly by making itself invulnerable for a bit, which is pretty nice. Next. Ah, the thrill of chasing down a giant starship. This boss is fun because, like Egg Breaker, you get to slowly tear it apart. I really like to take this boss slow and truly appreciate how much fun it is to rip it into tiny pieces. I may have a problem. Anyways, this boss doesn't have much attacks aside from its guns. You can also use the rocket wisp to do damage when you go 2D, which is nice. Still, watching it fall into space is just oh so satisfying. Next. Now imagine that, but to an even greater degree. That is the Egg Hawk. In this boss, you have to decide which part of it you think is the most annoying and then tear it apart from there. This boss poses a bit more of a challenge though, so it's slightly above. Next. Another Metal Sonic fight. This one is above the fight in CD because there's just more to it. The music is also just pure gold. I also really like the icy park vibes of this battle, while still retaining the Stardust Speedway aesthetic. Next. This is basically the fight before, but with more to it. This fight is also a lot more similar to the CD fight, but improves upon all the issues with the CD fight, making it actually pretty fun. Next. The Death Egg Robot, but the Sonic 4 variation. This boss gets a lot of hate, and I don't know, yes, I know why. This fight sucks, but I love it. I do like the direction that they were going in with the Death Egg fight. This battle starts out like the original Death Egg battle with a homing attack. Afterwards, though, it becomes glitchy and you have to avoid it as it does whatever the hell it wants and runs around like crazy. It's actually pretty stressful and I honestly really like that. The end sucks, though. You're fucked 80% of the time, there's nothing you can do about it. Next. Another Metal Sonic fight. Wow. This battle does a lot more with Metal Sonic's mechanics though, forcing you to dodge him when he's invulnerable and weave around. It's not the hardest boss considering it's the first boss of Generations, but still, the end where he chases you around in Electrode form will never not be awesome. Next. This fight is essentially just hit the right button at the right time to not die. Why is it this high up then? Because it's fucking cool. It's definitely playing on the egg carrier battles from Sonic Adventure, but to a much higher level. The music in this battle is also insanely good. While the first battle has a sweet and lighthearted melody that shows the magic of flying through the sky, the second battle just screams tension as you fight to save the world from the physical embodiment of Yin. Next. If only all the finales were as climactic as Unleashed's was. This boss is okay. It certainly isn't the best final boss, but it's still pretty fun. While the certain behind this being certainly is cool, the gameplay really doesn't do much to help that. Sonic's design in this fight is really cool though. Next. The first battle against the Masked Jackal, and the only one that isn't really bad or a copy of an earlier boss. This fight still does have its moments though. You're running across the back of a dead snake while avoiding infinite cybercubes and trying your best not to kill him before the fight gets interesting. Once you get into the sky, you have to hack through all of his clones in order to hit him, and that's it. Next. They actually did something cool with Metal Sonic after Heroes. This fight starts out as a normal race with Cobalt Blur before you fight him in the generator. While not quite as cool as this fight in Knuckles and Chaotix, the callback to Sonic 2 is still really cool, especially since you have to hit what are essentially his younger brothers into him to do damage. The final phase is where things start to get really interesting though. Metal Sonic gets the Phantom Ruby and goes berserk. You then have to run away while occasionally trying to find an opportunity to hit him. My only issue is that the difficulty spike here is a bit jarring, so much so that the developers literally had to put a checkpoint in the middle of the fight to make it more fair. Other than that though, it's really neat. Next. One of the only Zeddy that actually has character. Imagine Yoda if he was really evil and could talk normally. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Zik is just an asshole. His fights are still fun though. In the first battle against him, you have to guide his apple into a shredder and then use the rocket wisp to chase him around the Sky Islands. In his second fight, you have to hit him and then you win. In his third fight, he really shines though. You have to chase him around a very small strip over lava and weave between his attacks and the lava to hit him. He can also hit you in midair if you aren't careful, so watch out. Next. After completing a gauntlet of every other boss in Sonic Advance 2, you have to defeat the Death Egg Robot Z. While this boss does look kinda like the Death Egg Robot, I like how it's trying to be its own thing instead of just copying things that have worked in the past. This actually works well and makes the boss pretty fun. It's also the only boss in the game where you aren't constantly moving, so bonus points. Next. The final boss of Sonic Lost World. It sure is a boss. This is basically just a Nega Wisp armor clone, but with a little more polish. This fight has no difficulty though. You can beat it in about 2 minutes, and it serves more as a victory lap than an actual final boss. It still has absolutely fire music though. Next. Do you like hitting balls? You'll love Caterpillar then. This fight is really just a less fun version of Strider though. Still, after you get past the main mechanic, the rush to defeat it is pretty fun, especially when you get to flip it on its backside. Next. This boss takes the fire mechanic from the Dark Gaia Phoenix battle and does it just a little bit worse. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun to freeze the snakes around it and then climb up to it, and the combat is still insanely nice, but this fight could have been done better. Next. This boss is genuinely pretty fun. Blaze is very calculated, but also extremely fast, so it's actually really fun to try and outclass her while she beats the shit out of you. Next. The design of this boss, as well as his lore, is really interesting. While I won't get too deep into the story of Black Knight, it raises a lot of interesting moral questions. The Dark Queen's design is also really cool, because it's basically a revamped version of King Arthur. The music, as always, is beautiful. The only issue is the boss can be beaten in 20 seconds if you try hard enough. Next. The best boss of my least favorite Sonic game. Eraser is actually pretty fun to fight though, considering this fight is going to take you a while pretty much no matter what you do. It feels like an actual battle though, and would fit pretty well in an anime. I still hate Eraser as a villain though. Next. Are you a brain surgeon? No? This boss might be a little tough for you then. Sumo is one of the most fun guardians in Sonic Frontiers despite that. You constantly have to electrocute him and then try to get in as much damage as you can. Sumo doesn't give you much room to breathe though, meaning you have to thread your attacks together pretty quickly and pretty well to actually win. Next. The second best Chaos fight, and for good reason. This is the first time you fight him as Knuckles, and oh boy, he does not pull his punches. Not only does this watery bean boy have bigger arms than an average Redditor, but he also spends most of his time jumping around the arena. If this goes on for too long, he kills you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Next. The final boss of Sonic 2, and the start of the insanely climactic fights in the series. After watching your player 2 actually die, it's just you and Eggman. This was the original Death Egg Robot, and it's a pretty good fight. Its difficulty comes from more than just its lack of rings though. It's genuinely really stressful, but in a good way, especially for the final boss. I love it. Next. But it couldn't quite be as climactic as the Hotmobile. This fight is part of the reason why I love Sonic 3 so much. At first, you have to run away from Eggman's missiles as you watch the Death Egg power on and launch into space right behind you. Then the volcano collapses around you and you have to fight Eggman while surrounded in a cave of lava. The gameplay is alright, but the atmosphere makes it so much better. Next. Then we have the first time the Death Egg launched. This battle starts off with you defeating a relatively easy Lesser Machine. With all that build-up, it feels anticlimactic. But then, the area around you dims, and Eggman reveals himself, with his big, girthy arms. Here, you have to weave between his arms and his head perfectly to him in the face. This is a very good mix of atmosphere and gameplay. Next. The first part of the final boss of Sonic 2. At first I thought this boss wasn't anything special, but then I played it in Sonic Origins, and holy shit. This boss is fun because this boss is mean. It knows everything you're going to do, and that's certainly going to help it because you have no idea what it's going to do. Inconvenient, isn't it? In the end though, this boss boils down to counting. If you want to win, you have to memorize its attack pattern and then never miss an opportunity to attack. If you're any less than perfect in your acts, then you're done for. I love it. Next. As the true final boss of Sonic Colors, you would expect this boss to be much, much higher. Unfortunately, this boss is pretty much the bare minimum for a supersonic final boss. Her design is just a revamped Frenzy Wisp, and the gameplay isn't all that interesting. The worst part is, despite being the true final boss of Sonic Colors, this boss doesn't appear in any version of the game except for the DS version. The Nega Mother Wisp has a total of 2 attacks, but despite that, it's still a pretty fun boss. Next. The champion of B tier is yet another Sonic 06 boss. The first boss of Silver's campaign actually has really cool build-up. Design-wise, this variation of Iblis is probably the scariest boss in the game. He uses the buildings around you as well as the rubble to attack, but that won't stop Silver. With his psychic abilities, he can throw that rubble right back at Iblis. Overall, this boss is really fun, and it makes good use of Silver's abilities. Next. Finally, the A tier. Bosses in this category are very, very fun, and were clearly designed with the most amount of fun for the player in mind. Let's get started. Mega Knuckles is one of the best bosses in Sonic Advance. It took something really cool in the original Sonic 3 and made it even better. Not only does his first phase have expanded moves, but his second phase takes it to the max. He even has giant missiles. Next. I really don't know why people dislike this boss so much. While its first phase is pretty simple, its attacks get a lot more variety in the second. The only issue is that once you get it out of attack mode, it just lets you wail on it without trying to hit you at all. Next. The fake-out final boss for Sonic Advance 3 is probably better than any of the bosses in 1 or 2. You're defending the Emerald Altar from an enormous machine while doing your best to defeat Eggman. He only uses his arms and head to attack, but that's more than enough to be intimidating. Something tells me that Giganto's design was inspired off of this. Next. In the icy mountains of Chaos Island, a spider awaits its next prey. The battle against Spider starts out like a battle against Egg Walker, where you have to side loop and destabilize its legs. As you do this, the music builds up more and more, until you're prompted to attack its head. When you do this though, you get launched up into the sky and need to try to make your way down fast enough to destroy the headpiece. The music here is so triumphant, it really builds up the moment of skydiving to a guardian. Once its headpiece is gone, it's your turn. Next. This is easily the most intimidating boss on Kronos Island. No matter how much damage you do to this boss, there are 3 phases. You have to destroy all 3 of Asura's horns to destroy it no matter what. Climbing up its arms and using the rings to get up is actually really innovative, and is great training for the Giganto climb. Next. The true final boss of Sonic Advance 2. This fight's music is easily my favorite track in the game. Unlike the final boss of the original Sonic Advance, it's not trying to be Doomsday Zone. Instead, it's using the Doomsday Zone formula and adding upon it in its own unique way. Next. The first ever battle against Shadow, and the source of one of the most iconic lines in Sonic. The boss itself feels kinda like a dance. You and Shadow are desperately trying to get the edge on each other, while simultaneously blocking each other's attacks and attempting your own. Next. The final battle against Shadow takes this to a completely different level. In this fight, you're constantly running forward as a race to the Ark's cannon. Shadow can also use Chaos Sphere to throw you off. In the end, it's a perfect expansion on an already fun fight. Next. There's one more Shadow battle though, and this is just the absolute best. It's like the battle in Adventure 2, except now instead of trying to outsmart each other, it's a full-on race to get your attacks in first. Also, it may just be my version, but anytime Shadow gets a chance to attack, he just gets stuck and his attack never ends, so don't let him do that. Next. My personal favorite of the Heavies has a really interesting battle. She takes the form of an array of largely forgotten characters and uses them in battle. It made me feel like I was playing Sonic the Fighters again. Man, I missed that game. Next. As much as people hate this boss, and for good reason, it's not that terrible. I actually really enjoy it. Despite the fact that the custom character is completely useless in this fight, it's good training for the battle against Infinite. Of course, it's not a perfect fight, but it's still pretty fun. Next. Basically the battle against Metal, but harder. Instead of using lightning, the Masked Jackal uses phantom cubes to attack, as well as illusions. Out of all of Infinite's fights, this is easily the most enjoyable. Next. The first boss of Sonic Unleashed. This boss actually works really well with the boost mechanic. He's moving at a speed where you constantly have to work to get closer to him, and once you do get close, you need to watch out for the claws near his weak point in order to not get hit. This is one of the most innovative and actually creative boss that follows the boost formula. Next. This is an anime battle. Prove me wrong. What I like about this fight is that unlike most battles in the series where 2 playable characters go against each other, the fight changes depending on who you're playing as, with both Sonic and Blaze having their own unique and challenging moveset. The end of the fight with the button mashing will also never not be fun to me. Next. This is the peak of the Deadly Six. Zavok is easily the highlight of Sonic Lost World. Even though a lot of people hate him, each of his fights are really fun. His first battle is pretty par for the course. He slithers around the arena on his dragon, and you have to hit his tail in order to get up to him and attack. The second battle is easily his best though. You're now riding his dragon, and you have to chase him around and break his defenses to do damage. The music here also gives me chills. It really sells the idea that Zavok isn't playing around and really wants you dead. In the last phase of the fight, you have to try and knock him off the dragon. The timing here can actually be pretty tricky, and it always leaves you on edge. In Zavok's final fight, he turns giant and chases you up the tower. Unfortunately, this fight isn't as cool as it sounds. You can defeat him pretty easily with the boxes above him, and while his climbing is threatening, it's not that hard. Next. This boss takes what was fun about the Egg Eagle and makes it even better. In this battle, you're constantly chasing the Albatross down and attacking each of its segments. There's just something so satisfying about taking down each part of it and making it crash into the ground. Next. As much as I love Egg Emperor, the interpretation of it in Generations could have been better. That's because it takes away what makes this boss great and makes it much easier. While the cannons are a nice touch, I still think it could have been better. Next. Sonic and the Black Knight doesn't have the best bosses, but its good ones are good. King Arthur is a good example of this. There's something so surreal to me about chasing him down on horseback and having to parry his attacks. It feels kind of like foreshadowing for some of Sonic Frontier's bosses. Next. Okay, there's one Shadow fight that's better. While the original battle against Shadow is super easy, the rematch is tough. This battle feels like an actual Shadow fight too, where you have to constantly try and outsmart each other to win. Plus, it just feels good to fight him. It's honestly incredible. Next. Of all of the Guardians in Sonic Frontiers, the Ninja variants are definitely some of my favorites. Like a Shadow fight, in these battles you and Ninja are constantly trying to outsmart each other through sheer technique. However, unlike a Shadow fight, instead of having enhanced versions of your own abilities, Ninja has its own abilities that you have to figure out on your own. From stopping time to duplication, this boss gets tough in later stages of the game. I think we can all agree it's an easy A tier. Next. The final boss that spawned 1,000 final bosses. Though other bosses have done this formula much more poorly, Nega Wisp Armor actually manages to do it well. It uses a lot of the wisps that you've been using throughout the game against you. Though it's an overdone trope, I do really like it when the main character's abilities are reflected on them. Nega Wisp Armor also does this in a creative way, putting its own spin on the abilities instead of just using your own. Next. Now this is an Egg Dragoon fight. This machine was made by Eggman as the ultimate killing machine against Sonic. The only thing you didn't account for was that he wouldn't exactly be fighting the Sonic he's familiar with. As soon as the battle begins, the two of you start descending straight to the core of the Earth. Though Eggman does his best, the unparalleled strength of Dark Gaia is far superior to him. This boss is pretty fun to tear to shreds. In the last phase, the elevator breaks, and you're now falling to the core of the Earth. In all, it's the perfect build-up for the final boss. Next. But there is another. I'm honestly surprised that Egg Viper has never really returned in a Sonic game before, because it's one of my favorite bosses in Adventure. The boss starts out simple, alternating between platforms in order to hit him safely. After about a third of the way through though, Eggman, tired of your shenanigans, breaks one of the platforms, leaving you at his mercy. Now, he slowly decreases the size of your foothold with every attack until there's barely anything left. After you defeat him, he hasn't given up though. He dashes at you one last time, like me after I realized that my cherry cola was spiked with laxatives, and takes out another foothold. We really need another variation of this boss. Next. This boss is Egg Albatross taken to a whole new level. It's an even stronger version of the boss in Starlight Carnival. Oh, and wouldn't you know, more attacks means more to destroy. This is easily my favorite boss in Colors, just because of how satisfying it is to take apart each piece of it. I absolutely adore it. Next. To mark off the original end of the classic series, we have an even better variation of the Death Egg robot. After fighting a largely disappointing boss before this, we're now at the actual final boss, the Death Egg Robot 2. It doesn't play around though. First he uses his hands in order to crush you. Once you destroy those, he begins to chase after you, causing damage to the Death Egg in the process. It constantly shoots at you with a cannon powered by the Master Emerald as you desperately try to free it from Eggman's grasp. After destroying the robot, the damage to the ship is just too great, and the reactor meltdown reaches its peak. It won't be long before the ship explodes. Eggman grabs the Master Emerald and makes one more dash to try to escape. Unfortunately for him, this is the easiest part of the boss, and he's defeated in no time. Next. But that's not quite it. Doomsday is at hand now. After the destruction of the Death Egg, the best Eggman can hope for is to escape with the Master Emerald. Sonic won't let him do that though, and with the help of the Chaos Emeralds, the true finale is at hand. The music in Doomsday Zone really sells this moment. This is all or nothing. Either we win or lose, and the chaos all around us will take every chance to get in our way. The first phase is interesting. Instead of being able to attack the Death Egg robot, we have to guide the missiles into it to break its armor. Once that armor is gone, it's one last dash in order to destroy the robot for good. Next. The final boss of Sonic Adventure. Perfect Chaos takes his role seriously by causing some of the most destruction we've seen from a final boss. The boss itself is actually a lot more difficult than it looks. Any hit you take from Perfect Chaos can be detrimental since you need to build up speed in order to do damage. Supersonic speed allows him to skate across the water with ease, but once that form goes away, well, we all know what happens when Sonic touches water. Next. From Water Monster to Lava Monster, we now have the best version of Iblis. After destroying the Flame Core, all Silver has to do is eliminate Iblis and seal it inside of himself. Iblis won't let go of his hold on this world that easily though. With each of Iblis's attacks it gets closer and closer. Most of the time it'll be too far away for you to actually attack. Each time it reaches you, it'll damage the platform you're standing on before jumping back. If it hits the platform too hard or gets you 3 times, it's game over. Meaning either you break or it will break first. Overall, this really feels like a fight against a monster, one I'll never forget about. Next. I honestly prefer this version of the fight. Though we don't get Supersonic here, the battle against Perfect Chaos is still so incredible. Though you only have to hit him 4 times, he's not going to let you hit him that easily. In each phase, you have to boost across the water or climb up buildings in order to hit his core. In the final phase, he raises all of the debris into the sky, and you have to avoid his attacks as your platforms fall apart around you. Overall, it's the most fun I've ever had in a Chaos fight. Next. The champion of the A tier is Supreme. You may be asking why this boss is so high. It sucks. Well, yes, Supreme is a disappointment compared to the other bosses in Sonic Frontiers. Compared to the other bosses in the Sonic series, it's still really good. Though Supreme doesn't have a chase, or a climb, or any build-up at all really, the fight is still pretty intense. You're required to weave through a series of turrets in order to attack, but if you get too close, you're going halfway across the island. The fight will also take place at night, no matter when you trigger it. Unfortunately, Supreme never uses its gun during the fight, which makes for a lot of missed potential. You may be asking why. It's simple. It isn't loaded. There is no energy for that thing to fire at you. What about the QTE at the end of the fight? Supreme isn't shooting at you, they're shooting you into the distance. Despite the fact that this boss doesn't have much going for it gameplay-wise, it's still really fun, as it takes from the other Titans, making it the champion of A tier. Next. We've now made it to S tier. These bosses are some of the most enjoyable in the series. This is the absolute peak of Sonic. And to make the game more interesting, I'm now going to put 2 games on screen instead of just 1. The boss is from only one of them. Since you've gotten to know more and more about my opinions now, you should be able to guess where everything is. Let's go. To kick off the S tier, we have Strider. While this battle's first phase is pretty underwhelming, it takes us from 0 to 100 in the next phase. In the second phase of the fight, instead of shooting easy to avoid lasers, it shoots a bunch of fireballs all over the rails that you have to grind on. While the fireballs are color-coded, they're gonna go wherever they want. This boss is also super intimidating, being about the same size as Giganto and having a pretty good fight to back that up. Next. This is definitely the best Gaia fight. The Phoenix represents eternal life and rebirth, and from its ashes it is reborn in flame. So, how do you defeat it? By throwing water at it, of course. Even if this is an introductory to Werehog battles, it's still an introductory done right. No enemy spam, no annoying freezing mechanics, just a genuinely fun battle. Next. Fortress is a boss that's sorta difficult to encounter in the first place. You have to find one of the only 2 in the game and stand in just the right spot to make it angry. Once you encounter it, you know shit is about to go down. At first, you have to avoid it as it drops bombs on the terrain below. Then you have to go across an honestly really exciting variation of the rail mechanic to catch up to it. Sure, this fight may just be squid but less annoying, but I honestly really enjoy that about it. Next. This is the only time in the series where we fought against another character in a super form, and it does this well. This is basically the true final boss of Sonic 3. Super Mega Sonic starts the fight by hitting you out of the grip of a Negrobo, and then uses the Master Emerald to charge himself up. His attacks are really challenging, but never unfair. Since there's no way to hit him while he's in his super form, you can focus all of your effort into dodging. This is the perfect final boss to actually, truly, finally, once and for all, test your skills against the legitimate, Certain, absolute end of the game. Next. Okay, before we start, just listen. That is the sound of the most emotionally trying and tear-jerking moment in any Sonic game. This boss's jazzy motif is an absolute gem, but don't let that distract you from the tension here. Gamma and Beta are fighting for supremacy here, just like they did at the beginning of the game. Only this time, Gamma wants nothing more than to set his brother free, while Beta wants to prove that he's finally gotten better than him. Beta takes this very seriously too. He gives you very little room to attack, and it's clear that he's putting all of his energy into his shots. He wants to make sure that you remember this fight forever, and he does it pretty damn well. I also get a little choked up at the end of the game too, since the scene where Gamma walks away as he slowly dies is so bittersweet. You should be taking notes, Sage. This is how you do a character death. Next. This boss is one of my favorite in Unleashed, and for a good reason. Eggman takes what works in a pretty bland boss and a pretty fun introductory boss and makes them into one. What do you get? The most fun boost-based battle in a Sonic game. Damn, I really wish we could have gotten more of a challenge like this from Infinite, or Nega Wisp Armor, or Death Egg Robots. Oh well. Next. Ah yes, the final boss of Sonic Mania. While I was at first pretty underwhelmed by this as a kid, I grew up, got 6 years older. Wait, what the fuck? It's been 6 years since Sonic Mania? I'm a walking skeleton. Anyways, now that I'm older, I can really appreciate what this boss had to offer. It's not an epic final fight against an enormous machine like in Sonic 3, it's a chaotic, all-out race to get the Phantom Ruby. I actually think it's pretty cool that Sonic Team decided to take this path instead of a normal final boss. It's incredibly unique and I really enjoy it. Next. That being said, there's nothing wrong with an epic finale. The final battle against Double Doom starts out with you not just being motivated to defeat him, but by being given federal clearance to clean the floor with him. Pretty much all of the strongest weapons in the game are at your disposal, but this Alien King isn't going to bow down to just a couple of grenade launchers. Just kidding, yes the fuck he is. Double Doom gives it his all though, and I can respect that. Next. Here we have the unofficial final boss of Sonic Rush. Though most of the battles in Sonic Rush are meh at best, this one is where all of the budget went. This is basically the battle against the Death Egg Robot 2, but made even better than before. Though this fight only really has one phase, that phase is done well. Next. The true final boss of the Sonic Advance series. Unlike the other Advance games, which had a final fight against Eggman, this boss is against the Ultimate Gizoid's recreation. It's still insanely fun though. While Eggman has teamed up with Sonic in the past, he's always taken a much more backseated role in the actual battles. This fight isn't like this though. You and Eggman are working together in order to take this monster down. General uses a lot of attacks from his previous battles and amplifies them, as well as some of his completely new attacks. This battle is the absolute peak of the classic style battles, and is actually the last one on this list. I think this boss more than deserves to be at the top of the 2D Sonic battles though. Next. Though Silver's battles are pretty under average in Sonic 06, he absolutely turns that around in Generations. He's the last rival you'll have to fight, and he's definitely going to take that seriously. Silver's psychic abilities must have gotten a massive upgrade, because he's way stronger than he ever was before. Not to mention he ends the fight with a chase from a giant meteor of destruction. Need I say more? Next. Now this is just beautiful. This is the other variation of the Egg Dragoon. I say the other because I'm not counting that thing as a variation of my perfect little reptile boy. Forget what I said about the Egg Lancer being the best variation of the Boost boss. Egg Dragoon clearly takes the cake here. Remember what I said about Egg Dragoon being fun to tear apart in Unleashed? Well, this one does it even better. Not to mention, while the other bosses in Generation usually only take about 4 hits to defeat, the Egg Dragoon takes much more. This boss clearly had the most care put into it. Next. Hey, is it cold in here, or is it just me? Oh, I see what time it is. The first fight against Mephiles is already incredibly memorable. Mephiles starts out by taking the form of your shadow and using his minions of darkness to attack. Since there's no way to hit him, the best you can do is destroy as many minions as you can. While you're doing this, Mephiles continuously mocks you, telling you that what you're doing doesn't matter and is pointless. Regardless, once you've defeated enough of his minions, you can enter Chaos Blast form and actually do damage to Mephiles. You'll want to do this fast too, because your meter is constantly going down. After the first phase, Omega comes to join the battle, proving that even Shadow isn't enough to defeat this beast on his own. Even with Omega's insane power, the battle is no pushover, and it takes a lot of doing, and people say 06 is a bad game. Next. The first form of the Bio Lizard is insanely fun. I almost grouped this boss in together with Final Hazard, but decided not to because they're both classified as their own fight, and they're definitely intended to be two separate boss fights, rather than two phases of the final boss. Though Shadow is busy being an edgelord for most of the game, Amy is able to talk him out of it and he joins you. The fight itself constantly feels unnerving and very surreal, with the setting, the music, even the uncomfortable yet fun gameplay. The Bio Lizard itself feels very otherworldly, which is extremely fitting for it. The only way to take it down is to destroy the one thing keeping it alive. Once you've almost broken it though, you get flung into the air and have to avoid several bullets in order to get to its core. Though Shadow has always been alone, he can feel his friends supporting him. Next. To end the S tier, we have Wyvern. This is the final boss of Ares Island in Sonic Frontiers, and definitely the most well-built up Titan in the game. Right after Wyvern's chase scene, you can always see it flying above the island, waiting for you to challenge it. Once you get all the emeralds and challenge it, its climbing sequence is also easily the best in the game. Since Wyvern is shaped like a tapeworm and can't be climbed without it feeling underwhelming, you have a squid-style chase scene to get up to its head. Though this chase is pretty fun, it's nothing compared to the boss itself. Wyvern only has one physical attack, so it relies on missiles for everything else. Once you get close to it, Wyvern scratches at you and you have to parry it. I swear to god, it took me like 15 minutes to figure out what you were supposed to do once you got to its head, and I'm not even joking. Yes, I know I'm stupid. Once you parry it, you can do some damage, and if you're strong enough, you can actually grab Wyvern by the tail and throw it into the mountain on Ares Island. The end of the fight is also insanely well done, where you end up force-feeding Wyvern its own missiles. Next. And that's the end of the list. Okay, obviously not, but I had you for a second. Up next we have Double S tier. This tier is for bosses that have transcended peak Sonic and have nearly reached the heaven of legendary fights. Nearly. They didn't quite make it, but that doesn't stop them from being fantastic. Let's begin. At the bottom of Double S tier, we have something that's going to be extremely controversial. Sonic Forces may have been a pretty terrible game, but the final boss is actually very solid. The first phase is a harder version of the Egg Dragoon fight. Luckily, this can be bypassed pretty quickly by juggling. The second phase is definitely the best part of the fight, though. I hate the custom character, because I think adding a YN character to any mainline series is kinda awkward and doesn't fit well, but damn, the Wisp-Ons are really fun. This is the only part of the fight that feels like an actual fight against an intimidating machine, but it does its job really well, as Eggman constantly shrinks the arena and summons Egg Pawns. You have to do everything in your power to break its core open before it, well, incinerates you to death. Then there's the third phase, which is a Nega Wisp armor clone, but somehow they did it even worse than how Lost World did it. Okay, next. Yeah, no, the budget in Sonic Rush's boss fights went only to the end of the game. This battle is what set the stage for a lot of multi-super battles, or more specifically, one of them, and it does a really good job at that. Having to switch between Burning Blaze and Super Sonic to do damage perfectly encapsulates the feeling of adrenaline this boss gives me. Big Lizard. Next. So up next we have... Sorry, what was that? Well, I don't know what that was. Anyways, the next boss may be somewhat... Now you may be wondering how Time Eater, arguably the worst boss in Sonic Generations, made it all the way up to Double S tier. Well, it's simple. It didn't. Not on its own anyways. The 3DS version of this fight is actually a lot better and saves it from being a B tier boss at best. Though I don't really like classic and modern Sonic meaning that much, I have to admit, this boss is really fun. Even though you're having to constantly avoid debris from every area in the game, and... this battle is actually a pretty good way to end off Generations. Plus, Time Eater is probably connected to Mephiles, so bonus points. Next. That's right, Giganto is able to surpass both Supreme and Wyvern. When you first encounter her, yes, Giganto is a she, on Kronos Island, she immediately shows you that she's not going to be easy to take down. Instead of showing this to you in a cutscene like other Sonic games would, this is shown through a mini-boss. This boss is kind of a joke though. Not for you, but for her. She uses gravity manipulation, which she unfortunately never uses in her actual fight, and you have to use meteors to get to her head. However, once you're there, none of your hits are going to do a thing. Unlike Wyvern, the only time you can see Giganto is if you look over the mountains. To me, this is actually even more threatening. She's just sitting there, waiting for you to come out at the right moment. Once you get to her, you have to climb her. It's alright. It's kinda challenging if you don't know what you're doing, but once you get the emerald, it's go time. The boss itself is also really fun. Giganto has all of Supreme's attacks, except for the turrets. In other words, Giganto has all of Supreme's actually good attacks, as well as a lot of her own. In her second phase, she uses more lasers than any boss in the game, and unlike the lasers in Supreme's fight, they actually exist. Her QTEs are also really fun, even if they're both just button mashing. Okay, I think I'm in the clear for saying Giganto is better than Wyvern. Let's move on just to be safe. Next. Sonic Adventure 2 has one of the best final bosses in the series. After defeating the Bio-Lizard, it fuses itself to the Ark and begins to plummet it towards the Earth. In this battle, both Sonic and Shadow have to team up to destroy it. The Bio-Lizard uses many of its otherworldly attacks as well as its own lasers to keep you at bay. The coolest part about this fight, though, is that it can really feel intense if you let it go on for too long. Every time you hit the Bio-Lizard, you switch to another character. However, you can also switch to another character by flying above the boss if you're about to run out of rings. There's no limit to how many times you can do this, but there is a limit for how long the boss can go on. If you take more than 5 minutes, you're done. The dialogue is also really cool. Everyone is motivating you and cheering you on, except for one. Near the end of the fight, you can hear some of Gerald's dialogue. It's kinda chilling. Even though Gerald is long gone, what he's done in the past is still affecting the world. This final battle isn't really against the Bio-Lizard, it's against the rage of a man long gone. Next. Ah yes, here we have Eggman's true greatest creation, even if he's not the one actually piloting it. The Egg Emperor takes everything I liked from the Egg Albatross and amplifies it by about 10, except this time you're not battling a weapon or a machine, you're fighting a knight. You're fighting something that was made not just to destroy all in its path, but come out without a scratch. This battle is an absolute rush. At first you're running after the Mad Emperor in order to keep it from hitting you. Once you get to the arena though, it's a full-on battle to the death. You have to use all 3 of your characters in order to even think about doing damage. This repeats for about 3 runs before you finally can watch it explode. There's no doubt that this was by far the greatest machine Eggman ever created. Well, by himself anyways. Next. The reigning champion of the double S tier is Mephiles. Again, Mephiles takes everything that was good about his first fight and makes it way better. Instead of fusing himself to your shadow, Mephiles uses his power on the entire room that you're in, basically leaving you in a dark dimension of his creation. Instead of just using a swarm of dark minions to attack you, Mephiles combines his minions into enormous executors. Though the most these executors can do is shoot lasers, they pack quite a punch, and taking them down can be kinda tricky when you're dealing with 4 at once. After you've gained enough energy, you can break free of Mephiles' dimension and fight him head on. Mephiles isn't playing around this time though. Instead of just amplifying his attacks, Mephiles takes your strategy from the last fight and breaks it to bits. He's moving around so fast that it's impossible to hit him unless he's already in attack mode. At the end of the fight, as if to mock you, he does something he knows you're bad at. Mephiles creates a stairwell of his clones that you have to climb up to defeat the real version of him. The issue is, Shadow is really bad at performing action chains. If you were playing as Sonic, this would be a different story, but as Shadow, this attack is nearly impossible to overcome. Some people may call this lazy design, but I like to think of it as Mephiles mocking Shadow. We know that no matter what Shadow says, he does actually respect and possibly even look up to Sonic. So him struggling to do something that Sonic can do easily would really mess with him mentally. Maybe it's a reach, but I think it's really funny to think that Mephiles' final attack is just his way of telling Shadow he's inferior to the true ultimate life form. Next. Okay, before we continue into Triple S tier, there's one boss that's actually not on this list yet. The End from Sonic Frontiers. The reason I haven't put this on the list yet is because there's an update for this fight planned, and it was actually never finished. While it would be around C tier because it was frankly really rushed and a complete fight, I didn't think it was fair to put it there just yet. I'm gonna give it until the news story update to decide where it belongs on this list, so until then, next. This is it, the absolute heaven of legends among the bosses in Sonic games. To explain how this works, I took the 4 best bosses in the series and selected one of them for X tier, the absolute best in the series. The other 3 go into Triple S tier. Though these bosses weren't decided to be the absolute best, they were still incredible and are deserving of their place. Also, to make this even more interesting, I'm not going to be putting any of the games up to hint at where these bosses are from. Now you just have to think about each of the remaining bosses and decide which one goes where. What do you mean you don't remember which of the bosses are left? Were you not paying attention? Did you not memorize everything exactly where it was? Shame on you. Let's hope you get lucky then. The taker of the bronze medal for the absolute best boss in the series is the last boss on this list that isn't a final boss. Of course, I'm talking about Knight from Sonic Frontiers. Knight is easily the best of the Titans and Frontiers, and here's why. He appears with no words, no battle, just intimidation. His appearance, his aura, his design, it speaks loudly enough on its own. Sage simply looks down at Sonic and asks, "What will you do?" The only way to get away from this absolute beast is to use something that's already an enemy. You have to ride away on Squid in order to escape. Knight doesn't use anything but his shield during this chase, just to show off how powerful he is. Once you escape, Knight even kills the Squid you were riding on, making him the only enemy in the game that actually kills another boss. Though Knight's climb is still inferior to Wyvern's, it's still really fun. Knight starts off the climb by skating around the arena you're in, creating shockwaves of spikes everywhere. He then throws his hand down to attack. You then have to grind up the rails on his hand to get to his head. Once you get the emerald on his head, the battle really begins. And what's a knight without a sword? As soon as the battle begins, Knight grabs his sword and starts attacking. If you're unlucky enough to get hit by it, you get smashed into a wall. While all of the other Titans in the game just give Sonic anger or even a little bit of annoyance when they hit him, here it looks like Sonic is genuinely in pain. When you get in close to hit him, Knight will use his shield to block you. He then throws you back on his shield, and then you have to catch it and ride it back into the arena in order to hit him. In Knight's second phase, he goes even further by throwing his shield at you and then skating around the arena so fast that even Super Sonic keep up. The only way to hit him in this phase is to knock his shield into him and then do damage. At the end of the fight, you knock his sword out of his hands and into the cliffside above. To defeat him, you grab his own giant sword and cut him in half. Though this boss is pretty sparing with the QTEs, that's not a bad thing at all. So congratulations, Knight, you're the peak of our new frontiers. Next. The winner of the silver medal for the best boss in Sonic is, kind of, Eggman's greatest creation. Metal Sonic starts this fight out perfectly. He stands above everyone, atop the highest tower in a thunderstorm. He's collected the data of both Chaos and the Ultimate Lifeform to become the Metal Overlord. He then destroys the tower around him and uses its debris to become a god. Though this transformation sequence is long, seeing everything come into place is still insanely cool. In the fight itself, you have to use each of the different teams in order to weaken the Overlord. Here, Metal Overlord shows off his powers, and they are insane. Not only that, but you can only use a certain character to hit him at a certain time, so keeping everyone unfrozen is key. After doing this 3 times, the true final battle begins. Sonic's team each enter their super forms, though Tails and Knuckles are a bit restricted, and chase after Metal Overlord in a massive sky arena. The only way to do damage is to break through his attacks in order to charge up a Team Blast. Metal Overlord can also use Chaos Control to drain your rings even further, making this fight even more stressful. Nonetheless, once you use Team Blast 5 times, you're able to prove to Metal that world domination and genocide isn't the best way to deal with an identity crisis. Next. The winner of the gold medal of Sonic bosses, and the peak of the triple S tier, is Dark Gaia. I basically gave Dark Gaia the opposite of the Biolizard's treatment, because while Dark Gaia's phases are incredibly different, the setting of the boss is the same both times. The same can't be said for the Biolizard and Final Hazard. Dark Gaia starts out the fight by taking away the part of herself that was locked away in Sonic. Things look incredibly hopeless and bleak, but that doesn't stop Chip. He calls the Gaia Temples to himself and is able to transform into at least a fraction of his powers like Gaia. The start of the fight is simply getting to Dark Gaia. This can serve as a bit of a challenge though, since Dark Gaia has meteors and hell lasers on her side to make sure that you never make it to her. Once you get there, the battle is on. After the QTEs, you then have to deliver Light Gaia's support and run across his body to attack one of Dark Gaia's eyes. The music here feels unbelievably final and powerful. After repeating this process 3 times, Dark Gaia transforms once again into perfect Dark Gaia. Sonic then has no choice but to activate the emeralds and transform into Super Sonic in order to help Light Gaia. Dark Gaia then pulls a massive shield above herself that only Light Gaia can pass through, so in order to help him, you have to destroy the snakes that are generating Dark Gaia's shield. Once you're through, you then have to build up enough energy to boost into all 7 of Dark Gaia's eyes. Then, after one insane QTE and boost sequence, balance is restored to the world once again. Dark Gaia is easily the second best boss in the entire series, and definitely deserves her gold medal. Next. Finally, the X tier. The absolute best boss fight in the series is... Oh. No, that wasn't the boss. I've just been transported into a void of my own bad decisions and opinions. You know, I went into this knowing people would hate that I put it here. I tried to find someone to replace it. I really did, but when I did, I realized something. This is my list. This is my opinion. This reflects who my favorite boss in the series is, and that boss is... Solaris' debut is an absolutely magical one. It starts out by destroying the entire universe. Once that's done, only those protected by Chaos are allowed to survive for a little longer. After collecting the Chaos Emeralds from the corners of a destroyed, damned world, the ultimate finale is at hand. Solaris is more than a being beyond space, it's a being beyond time. Its mere existence can shatter the universe in a second. It takes Sonic, Shadow, and Silver in super forms to destroy it once and for all. The first phase of the fight shows off Solaris' insane defense. The stone that makes up Solaris' body is nearly unbreakable. Even the power of Supersonic Supercharge, something that could deter Metal Overlord, Dark Gaia, even the End, can just barely dent Solaris' skin. As you continuously switch between characters and do everything you can to destroy Solaris' armor, the music, the atmosphere, just sheerly where you are, you can't help but feel hopeless. You're barely doing any damage, and any hit you take is detrimental. That hopelessness is dashed away though as you persevere. As you continue on, more and more of Solaris' armor begins to break away. His right arm, his left arm, and his headpiece, all of it crumbles into stardust. Once the body is revealed, you can do a lot more damage. Once you've taken it out though, as soon as you think it's over, Solaris reappears once again in an angelic form. It seems that it truly is impossible to defeat a being like it, unless you can destroy its core. The final phase of this battle shows off Solaris' true destructive power. Though Solaris doesn't have as much defense as he had in the first phase, good luck getting a lot of your hits in. There are so many sun lasers and meteors going around that any character will have a hard time getting their attacks in. Anything you throw with Silver will easily get destroyed by the sun lasers. Shadow won't be able to charge up his Chaos Spear unless he's being extremely careful, and Sonic is the only one with a chance to do damage, but you have to be very mindful of everything that's going on to get to Solaris' core. Though the fight is tedious, it's so much fun, and it really feels like a battle against a god. Once you've truly defeated it, Elise blows out the candle, and Solaris ceases. For a while, anyways. And that's it. If you somehow made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. If you disagreed with anything on this list, that's totally valid. This is just my opinion, and I'd love to see your own rankings in the comments section below. If you have any suggestions for future series for me to rank all the bosses in, I will be ignoring them. As for our game, unfortunately, if you did not guess more than 60% of these correctly, you have failed the exam and will have to rewatch the video until you are at least able to get a D. Study hard, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!